My brother-in-law, Kevin, surprised us by saying, "Really, I sold our house." My husband and I were so shocked we couldn't speak, but my mother-in-law was the most surprised. She asked why we did that and why we didn't pick her up. My mother-in-law got very upset and started arguing with Kevin. To calm down, Kevin tried to explain why he sold the house. "My name is Sandra, and I work from home with my husband Robert. We liked working from home because we could take breaks when we needed to." Then my mother-in-law came to live with us. Financially, we were doing well, but she was always asking us why we weren't going out to work. Every time she asked us, I felt exhausted and frustrated. We tried to explain that we worked from home, but she didn't understand. She thought we were just fooling around and not thinking about the future. My mother-in-law was worried and often said she should have gone to live with Kevin. Kevin is Robert's brother, and he married a rich woman named Carol. But we knew Kevin wouldn't come to get her because he was too busy enjoying his rich wife's money. So my mother-in-law kept waiting for Kevin to come and take her to his big house, hoping it would eventually become her home. But we knew that was unlikely to happen because Robert had already made it clear that she could live with him. Kevin, however, refused to let his mother live with him. So we ended up living together, even though we were labeled unemployed for working remotely. We put up with it because that's just the way my mother-in-law is. And then, out of the blue, we got a call from Kevin. "I'm coming for the weekend," he said, and hung up before we could answer. Robert and I were at a loss for what to do. My mother-in-law overheard the conversation and got excited, thinking Kevin was coming to get her. "He's coming for me. Please help me pack," she said, and dragged Robert to her room. But Robert tried to explain that Kevin probably didn't mean anything by it, but she didn't believe him. "He didn't say anything about picking you up, did he?" asked Robert. "He didn't say anything, but he has to come get me," she insisted. We couldn't understand why she was so sure. Ever since she'd been in our house, she'd been doing whatever she wanted, not doing any housework and relying on the money we gave her. We didn't want to force her to stay, so we packed up her things and waited for Kevin to arrive. When Kevin and his wife arrived over the weekend, they seemed suspiciously nice. My mother-in-law greeted them happily, complaining about us not treating her well. "You guys don't mistreat Mom," Kevin said, defending her. "We're not mistreating her. We give her money and let her eat whatever she likes," Robert explained. "Sandra is handling the house chores," Robert said, looking uneasy. But Kevin seemed suspicious. Robert has always been a bit clueless, probably treating Mom badly without even realizing it. "And it seems Sandra isn't the considerate type," Kevin said, agreeing with my mother-in-law. Hearing this conversation, Robert and I couldn't help but frown. Despite this, we decided to entertain our guests and led them to the living room. We all sat around the table with Robert and me on one side and the couple on the other. "What are you sitting around for?" "Serve the tea," my mother-in-law demanded. "I thought you were going to make the tea, mother-in-law," I replied. "Making an old woman work, you see, Kevin." "Sandra is this kind of person," she said, even fake crying. I was too stunned by her behavior to argue back. After I served the tea, Kevin and his wife became serious. "The truth is, we sold our house," Kevin said. Robert and I were shocked, and my mother-in-law was the most surprised. "Why would you do something like that? Didn't you come to pick me up?" she asked, flustered. Kevin tried to calm her down, explaining that they were in debt and needed a place to stay temporarily. "What debt?" my mother-in-law asked. "I was trying to start a business, but it didn't go well," Kevin explained, laughing nervously. Robert and I sighed, feeling exasperated. "We only need to stay until we find a new house." "Please, we have nowhere else to turn," Kevin pleaded. Feeling a bit conflicted, we agreed to let them stay temporarily but made them promise to leave within a month. "Got it," Kevin said, still laughing nervously, as they went back to prepare to move their things. After Kevin and his wife left, my mother-in-law sat silently, looking thoughtful. We assumed she was still in shock. The next day, their belongings arrived promptly. "We have so much stuff. Where should we put it all? We might have to sell some or rent a locker," we discussed while moving Kevin's things. Suddenly, my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. "I've been thinking, wouldn't we be more secure in the future if Kevin's here? So you freeloaders can leave, can't you?" she said abruptly. My husband and I were taken aback by her sudden demand. If you insist, I can tolerate Robert staying. But I don't need a wife who can't do anything. Get a divorce. Then the space that Sandra was occupying can be used for all these packages," she eagerly suggested, looking at my husband for agreement. "What are you talking about?" He reacted astounded. As usual, then my brother-in-law and his wife arrived. My mother-in-law greeted them joyfully, but I was still shaken by her earlier words. Despite this, my husband decided to ignore them for the moment and asked his brother to deal with the packages. "There are more than I thought. Try to reduce the number, rent a locker, or sell some if you have to," my husband suggested. But his brother didn't like the idea. "These are important packages. How could I sell them? What if someone steals them from a locker or they get damaged?" "Are you going to take responsibility, bro?" he retorted. My husband shook his head, disappointed by his brother's selfishness. "This is our house, you know. It's only natural that you should endure some inconvenience. If you don't like it, find a place to live quickly and leave," my husband asserted. At that moment, my mother-in-law interrupted, shouting, "What are you talking about? Didn't I just say if you two are not happy with Kevin and the rest, you can leave? You're basically freeloaders. You're not needed in this house. Kevin is trying to start a business, and all you two do is loaf around the house doing so-called remote work. You're a nuisance." My husband and I looked at each other in disbelief, while my brother-in-law and his wife were surprised by my mother-in-law's words. But then they started to smirk. "That might not be a bad idea," Kevin said. "Mom, that's a good idea." "Yeah, it's a hassle to look for a place so we could live here. So sell this house to us, right, Carol?" Carol chimed in. My husband and I were dumbfounded at their words. "What nonsense are you—" my husband began, but was interrupted by my mother-in-law, who gloated. "See, both Kevin and Carol are saying the same thing. So what will you do, Robert? If you're going to divorce, you can stay here," she said, glaring at me triumphantly. I braced myself to retaliate, but my husband spoke first. "No, you just say whatever you want. Why does Sandra have to leave?" he said, his face red with anger, raising his voice. "Don't shout like that. It's better without a burden around, isn't it?" my mother-in-law retorted. But my husband responded in an exasperated tone. "You don't understand anything. This is Sandra's house." My husband's words made my mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and his wife gasp. My husband continued, adding to the tension, "This is the house that Sandra bought for our life together." "What? What are you saying? Isn't it the husband's job to buy the house? There's no such rule. Moreover, Sandra covers all of Mom's allowance and living expenses. Sandra said she takes on that burden because your pension is minimal, and it would be difficult for you to have financial freedom with just that," Robert explained, glaring at his mother-in-law with an intense expression. "Despite this, we've not used any of Mom's pensions since she moved in here. If Mom ever wanted to leave, Sandra has been managing it so she could live independently. But instead, Mom, you've been bossing Sandra around, interfering with her work. You're the problem. If you don't like Sandra, you should leave right now," Robert asserted. "I don't believe any of this," my mother-in-law insisted. "We don't mind if you and Kevin temporarily stay, but some patience should be expected. We didn't want you to live here in the first place. We only agreed because you begged us," Robert said, glaring at Kevin and his wife. Kevin and his wife broke out in a cold sweat, not used to Robert raising his voice. "Just kidding, but you sure are earning a lot, huh? I wish you could teach me some business tricks, right, Carol?" Robert said, lightening the mood. "While it's true we were worried about living with our sister-in-law, it seems like she's a good person after all." Kevin and his wife smiled at each other, but my mother-in-law was unyielding. "Don't act so high and mighty. You're just a bum enough, Robert. You should leave too. You should go outside and see how harsh this world can be." My mother-in-law filled with conviction, refusing to listen to anything we said. Afterward, Robert and I sighed in disbelief. Interrupting her, I said, "Well, if that's how you feel, we'll pack our things and move to a new house. You guys will be stuck with a mortgage. But if that's okay with you, don't come crying to us for help. If you insist, mother-in-law, we'll leave. Even with a pension, maintaining your lifestyle will be challenging. But I guess that can't be helped," I added. At our words, my mother-in-law turned beet red and yelled at us to get out. "Wait, you can't be serious. We don't have to do that, do we?" We protested. Yes, yes. If you two are here, we're safe. Kevin and his wife tried to stop us. But my mother-in-law gave us a fierce look and said, "Don't you dare talk back, Kevin. You're going to be a CEO, aren't you? I don't mind you using my pension. So just start a company and show us how successful you can become. I'll show you what happens when you defy us." My mother-in-law's words were filled with intensity. Hearing this, we decided it was best to no longer get involved with her or Kevin's family and left the house. Of course, the mortgage on the house remained, but we changed the ownership to Kevin's name. Some time had passed since then. While there was some residual dissatisfaction from that incident, having been free from my mother-in-law's sarcasm, we had resumed our normal routine. Just when we were working from home in our new apartment, as usual, my mother-in-law called my husband crying. "Kevin has taken my pension and disappeared. He hasn't come back in a week. Carol and I are left alone in the house and we're in trouble. Please help us," she wept. After my husband calmed my mother-in-law, he asked why Kevin had gone missing. I gave all of my pension to Kevin for his startup, but he ended up spending it all on gambling. When I confronted him about it, he disappeared. She cried out desperately. Since my mother-in-law couldn't continue the conversation through her sobbing, the phone was handed to Carol. "Could you please call us back? We can't live like this." Ever since Kevin failed his startup and sold the house we were living in, our parents have disowned us. My dad won't forgive us for selling that house. We haven't been able to reach either our dad or mom since, Carol pleaded with my husband. At the sight of them, my husband muttered, "I knew it," in a disgusted tone. "That's unfortunate, but don't involve us. We warned you when we left, didn't we? Even if you come crying to us, we won't help you. You can report Kevin as missing to the police." "It's none of our business," he said, and then hung up. I was shocked, but my husband said they got what they deserved, and I agreed. After that, they called my husband's cell phone many times. When my husband, frustrated, answered the phone, Carol would cry about not knowing how to report Kevin as missing. We were surprised she didn't know and gave her advice to call the police. However, they still couldn't find Kevin. Just when we thought they might not find him, we heard that Kevin had been arrested for bank robbery in another state. Apparently, he did it to repay his debt. It seems it wasn't his first offense, and he would likely face actual jail time. Carol can't go back to her parents' home and is still living with my mother-in-law in that house. It's uncertain whether or not she will divorce Kevin. That's probably the least of her concerns right now. She registered with a temp agency and is struggling with her first job ever, but she's somehow making ends meet every day. As for my mother-in-law, Kevin took all of her pension, and now she has to repay his debt. She has also started working part-time to repay the debt. My husband and I expressed sympathy for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family, but we have made it clear that we have no intention of helping them, and we have cut off all communication. They must be tasting the hard realities of life that my mother-in-law always talked about. Despite the changes since my mother-in-law moved in with us, my husband and I are glad that we have returned to our peaceful days.